Right, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining our webinar this afternoon. We'll give it a few minutes whilst we've got people joining us. But delighted you could make it. My name's Emma Bridger. I am founder of People Lab, and I'm joined by Katie Austin, who is another People Lab employee, and Eric, who I'll let Eric introduce himself in just a sec. I'm very excited to have Eric joining us today. He is our expert on all things AI. If there is such a thing, we'll have a chat about that in a minute, right, Eric? Whilst we're
Yes.
waiting for people to join, we always like to ask where in the world you're joining from. It's always really interesting to see where people are dialing in from today, because some webinars attract sort of very sort of specific audiences, and others are much more global. So please pop in the chat where you're dialing in from today. We'd love to see that. Let's see what comes through. Oh, we've got someone from Yorkshire, Birmingham.
Vienna, very nice.
Oh, okay, there we go. We're starting to get a little bit more further afield. It's always fascinating, Eric, to see where people dial in from. Oh,
Yes.
Brighton, that's nice and local to me. I'm in Hastings, by the way, and going to be really stereotypically British here and talk about the weather. So the sun is shining here in Hastings today. I hope it is where you are. Oh, we got someone from USA, Indiana, Israel. Wow. I love this. I love this kind of like broader kind of what's the word I'm looking for, Katie? Help me out here. Menopause brain speaking. This
An
kind of like
international
that's
audience
good.
we've got.
Yeah. Yeah. So you'll see we are recording the session today. So we'll send everybody that's signed up for the webinar a copy of the recording. And we'll also be doing a little bit of a write-up as well. And yeah, really excited to be joined by Eric today. So obviously, AI has been a hot topic now for quite a while. And like many of us, I've been experimenting with AI for quite a few years actually, and have seen how we've gone from, a few years ago, it was all about prompt engineering, and now we're much more, how can we use it much more strategically? And everyone's talking about agents. And I think it's always useful to have different perspectives, but I think never more so than when you get a real live in-house person like Eric to come in and say how they are using it inside an organization. Because you get like people like me, consultants, and we are not bound by the same sort of limitations, I guess, that, if you're working in-house, you might be. So I wanted to get Eric in, and I think I came across Eric through LinkedIn and was just super impressed by, Eric, you're really clear, pragmatic, like easy to understand updates, and your honesty as well. It really kind of spoke to me. So we had a few chats and said, Eric, would you come on and share your thoughts and your experience with us? And Eric luckily said, yay. So that's great news. I think the other thing for me, part of the reason I'm fascinated by this topic, apart from the fact it's just this brave new world, is that I think it's really rare that you get an experience like this where we are all learning together, right? Even though we have some people that would call themselves experts, I think most of us would say that we're learning as we go. And I think there's such a great opportunity for us to all learn together and share tips and ideas and experiences. And every time I'm on a call with someone, literally, we get talking about AI, and someone will come up with something that I haven't tried yet, or something that, something that they've done that's worked really well, or maybe something that they would not do anymore. Every conversation I have, I learn something new. So we kind of wanted to really, I guess, kind of lean into this sort of collective intelligence and get people to share their thoughts, their experiences, what's working today, what's not working today. So as we go to the webinar, I'm going to get Katie to pose a few questions to you. So I'll give Eric a break from talking when we're sort of at various points through the webinar to give you an opportunity to share what's working for you. And also, please feel free to ask questions as well as we go through the webinar. Um, just to say, there's a reason that we kind of have this quite locked down. You might have heard the story before. We've been burnt in the past with Zoom, having some uh, dodgy folk joining and sharing explicit images, shall we say. I wasn't actually on that webinar, and I laugh about it now, probably because I wasn't there. But poor Katie, Katie and my colleague Lee were on that webinar, and it was pretty scary, wasn't it, Katie, at the time?
Yeah, I
So
still have flashbacks to that.
yeah,
So
she's still traumatized by that. So, uh, in fact, she was so quick thinking. I think that most people kind of missed it, but I think it still haunts you, doesn't it? So, Anyways, that's why we have to be really locked down. Unfortunately, we can't let you unmute, etc. So we're going to have to rely on the old chat today to get conversation going. But that's not to worry, that's all good. So, Eric, I'm going to come over to you now. Rather than me introduce you, tell us about yourself. Who you are, what your role is. What your day job is. Just a bit about yourself. Over to you, Eric.
Thank you. So I will keep this fairly brief so we can get into the more interesting part of the discussion. So look, I've spent most of my career in internal communications, working in complex businesses. So my background is very much in-house. So building comm strategies, supporting leaders, handling restructures, transformation programs, content creation, events, and the everyday reality of trying to help people make sense of what's going around them within the business. And a big part of my work has always been about sort of listening and judgment and understanding what people are asking, where leaders are genuinely aligned, and where things are a little bit unresolved but being communicated anyway. And when it comes to AI itself, I didn't really come to it through a fascination with the technology. I started using it because I was dealing with the same pressures a lot of us face, and I wanted a better way to support thinking, not just content production. So over time, my work has turned into a series of real experiments embedded in real comms work. So strategy development, change comms, leadership messaging, and more recently, sort of building and maintaining AI agents grounded in actual business context. So everything we're going to be talking about today comes from using AI in the middle of real internal comms work, seeing where it helps, where it disappoints, and, most importantly, what it tells us about how we already work as a profession. And the AI part is important, but I think the internal communications part is really what sort of grounds the conversation for me. And I always say that when people say that I'm an AI expert, I always correct them saying that I'm not an AI expert. I'm a comms expert who uses AI within his work. And I think there is a difference there.
I love that, Eric. Thank you. Thanks for that. Yeah, just kind of really reinforcing the point that we're all kind of learning this together, right? We're all, like I say, let's embrace that. Let's enjoy that because it doesn't very often happen. Usually, you kind of go into a field of expertise and someone else is an expert, and you have to kind of, develop yourself to become an expert. And I think this is an area where we can all hit the ground running with it, really, and just experiment, like say, experiment.
Yes.
And I've said already, Eric, that one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on the webinar today is because you are a real life in-house at the moment, anyway, in-house internal comms pro. Um, you're at the sharp end of this, right? So it's all very well for consultants like me to say, well, just try this and just do that. But I'm not in-house, so I don't know how it feels. So I would love to find out from you to get us warmed up. What has changed in your role in the last 12 months or so since I know you've been using it a bit longer, but last 12 months or so using AI, what's different?
Well, look, I would say that, a year or so ago, I'd usually just come in once there was something to work with. So maybe not perfect, but, at least I had the shape of a message. And then my job was to turn that into something a bit more, something clearer. Now it starts a little bit earlier than that. And nowadays it's more about working out what we are actually trying to say before we say anything. And I think that approach sort of shifts everything a little bit because you end up having more conversations with stakeholders about the basics, like what are we actually doing here? What matters? Or are we even ready to communicate this yet? Rather than just the usual, can you write something? And I've also found that I'm paying more attention to sort of keeping things consistent over time and not just one piece, but sort of making sure that we are not drifting away from what we said before as part of our strategy. So, I mean, look, the job hasn't really changed, but I think where I spend my time has. So less writing, I guess, and more figuring things out earlier.
That's really interesting. So what I'm hearing then is it's kind of almost helped you to be more strategic with your
Yes.
stakeholders.
Yes, absolutely. It's changed my role completely because, as I said previously, it was just, I got contacted with an issue and then we worked it out. Nowadays, I get brought in much earlier. So we
Mm.
can discuss whether this approach is the right one, whether we want to talk about the right things, or whether we are approaching it from the right direction. And I think it changes the role completely, because suddenly you turn from somebody who just produces content into somebody who shapes the conversation. And I think that's a very different role.
So that's really interesting. I think let's just dive into that sec. So when did you realize AI was going to be more than just a kind of a content generation tool, and how did that realization come about?
Well, look, I don't think that was a single moment. I think it just slowly started. I just slowly started noticing sort of different patterns showing up in the work. So early on, I was using it like most people do: write this, summarize that, give me a first draft. And it was useful, but it was also fairly predictable. So the shift came when I started bringing it earlier, before anything was really formed. And I think that's when it stopped being about producing words and started sort of exposing the thinking behind them. So the first time I saw this properly was while working on a comms plan after a major business restructure. So instead of, for example, asking AI to write the plan, which it could have done, I used it to shape a workshop, analyze what people actually said, and use it to figure out what the work actually needed to be. And I think that's when it became clear that I wasn't just generating content, but helping test whether the thinking held up. And again, I saw the same thing when I started working with employee feedback. So if you ask AI to summarize, you get a really nice output. But if you ask it to surface what people are really concerned about and what leaders need to understand, it starts behaving very differently. And I think that was when it clicked for me. So if you start using AI at a different point in the work, the work all of a sudden becomes much more than content, and it becomes something that's a bit more strategic and something that's a bit more relevant to what the business is trying to achieve.
Mm, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And thinking about that on the sort of the strategic
Mhm.
piece, I mean, something that I've heard you say is that AI doesn't make internal comms more strategic. It simply makes the absence of strategy visible faster. So can we just dig into that a little bit? 'Cause I think there's a really good point there. Some really good elements we can kind of pull out of that conversation.
Yes. So, I mean, look, when I say that AI doesn't make internal comms strategic, I'm not trying to be clever. I'm
Mm,
just I'm just describing what I noticed once I started using it in real work. So when AI is used early, things move along very quickly. Drafts appear sooner. You can test different ways of saying something without much effort. And of course, questions come up earlier as well than they used to. And as a result of all of this, it becomes much harder to carry sort of vague direction or half-baked thinking from one step to the next. Because before that, there was often more time, more rounds, more rewrites, more conversations, more space for things that didn't quite make sense yet to travel along the way. And that
mm,
didn't necessarily mean that the thinking was strong. It just meant that the cracks didn't always show immediately. And with AI in the mix, I think they show up much faster. And I've seen this most clearly in strategy and change work. So you start with a brief that feels reasonable, and then very quickly you can see where it doesn't quite add up. So you realize that the messages don't fully connect, or
mm,
the priorities haven't been chosen, or the different parts of the business are pulling you in slightly different directions. So AI is not going to tell you any of this. It just reflects it back to you sooner than before. And I
mm,
think that's the key point for me. The tool doesn't give you a strategy. It just makes it obvious where you don't have one yet. And that's why I always say that strategy becomes unavoidable. So decisions have to be made earlier. You can't really rely on time or process to sort of smooth things out later. Somebody has to decide what matters, what doesn't, and what you are actually trying to achieve before you go much further in the process. And I think with this approach, all of a sudden, everything changes because, as I said, you turn from somebody who just generate content into somebody who shapes the direction of the business. And I think that's where our value sits. And I think this is what we all should be focusing on if we want sort of the profession to survive this new new wave of changes that are happening around us.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I see that we have just been joined by our other guest today, Sarah. Sarah,
Hi
are you there? Hello,
everyone.
Sarah. Hi, how you doing?
Hello.
How you doing? All right?
I'm good, thank you. Apologies for coming a little bit later. I've just been delivering a company-wide learning lab on AI, funnily enough, so it's very timely.
Couldn't be better. So, we've just kind of started with a few kind of high level questions, Sarah. So, why don't you just share a little bit about yourself and your role and what I think one of the key questions I was asking Eric was what he's doing differently now, 12 months on or so, in light of AI. So, tell us a bit about yourself, Sarah, and how you're using AI in your organization.
Yes, of course. So Sarah Mura, hello. I've been working in internal communications for around 20 years. I've been at Elsevier now for 5.5 years. Elsevier is part of Relex. We're a data technology organization. We have 4 businesses, around 36,000 employees globally, around 180 countries. So we're a large scale technology company. Elsevier has been traditionally a publishing business, but has moved into the technology and AI space. We've been using AI for over 20 years. My role is global head of internal communications. So I have a key role of thinking about mainly our culture, the kind of culture we want to build so that we can create the right environment for business growth, but also an environment where people feel that they belong, and where they can thrive. And so in obviously we've been applying AI to our products and our tools and our services for a number of years now. But with the acceleration of integration of AI into the way that we work, we're doing 2 things, I guess. One, we're thinking about how AI can enhance and enable the way that we work as an internal communications function. What does it mean for us? What is the productivity, efficiencies? How do we think differently? But also, and I talk about this as like the biggest change program probably of my career, is how do we create an AI enabled culture? And there are so many different facets to what that means and what that looks like. But we're taking it very seriously and we're being asked to move fast and at pace. And that comes with challenges, of course, as well as opportunities. So we're right in the thick of it. And the more people I speak to, sometimes I speak to teams or people where they're further ahead than us, and sometimes I speak to people where they're just starting out. And it's a really interesting conversation either way. So I love that I'm part of this conversation, Emma. Thank you so much, because I think it's just so important to all talk and share and peer-to-peer learning effectively, isn't it? So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, spot on, Sarah. I made that point right at the beginning that it's such a unique opportunity, not just for our discipline or our kind of whatever wherever you're working, right? It's a
Yeah.
unique opportunity because we're all learning this together, right? And that doesn't very often happen, does it? You normally get people that have kind of, maybe done, degrees or masters or training, or they've got certificates. And with this, we're all kind of learning on the job as we go. And the world's moving so quickly that what we kind of learned a few years ago now is almost redundant, right? So we're and like you say, learning from each other, which I find really energizing, and I love that. But really want to kind of encourage people to share their thoughts, their learning, and just to tell us how you're using AI. So I think Katie's popped a question in the chat about where AI has made the biggest difference to the way that you work. So love to hear from both of you. Actually, I'm going to put you on the spot now.
Yeah.
Where's it made a big difference to the way that you work, Sarah?
Um, a few areas. So the first one was an obvious one, but it was had such a big impact, was just the summary, the fast summary of vast amounts of information data. How many of us in internal comms have sat through like having to process 1,000 survey results off the back of an event or something we've delivered or something we've designed? It used to take me days, weeks sometimes. And that sort of immediate result, being able to churn data really quickly and drive insight out has been initially was kind of the thing that really stood out as being different. Right now, and it's very exciting, it's about how we build thinking capability based on reference material. So one of the things that I'm experimenting with and with great success, and I'm surprised how successful it's been because I didn't think, because I'm also not AI trained, so I'm sort of learning as we go, is building a set of almost agents with specific skills. So we use Claude. We've just rolled Claude out across the whole of Elsevier. We also have ChatGPT. We have other tools as well. I think we've got about 6 or 7 tools available to us across the business. Some are more around coding, so specifically for our technology teams. So what Claude has enabled us to do is to set up what they call skills. And I've been building a set of skills for specific topics. For example, measurement and insight, a skill, or a brand and story of value skill, or an editorial skill. And that enables me to very quickly set running, and sometimes at the same time, multiple requests and tasks that I would have had to do myself. And that's drawing on maybe 6, 7, sometimes 15 pieces of reference material to write an article for me, to design a PowerPoint deck for me, to do some thinking about a campaign or delivering a strategy. So that's one thing. I won't hog, I promise, but I'm so passionate about this stuff. The other thing it's doing, which is super interesting, is the persona work. So we've built out different personas now, not only at the traditional sort of senior leader, people manager level, but really digging in on specific areas of the business, right down to sort of team persona if you want to. So we have, for example, 2,500 technologists. We also have just under 2,000 people working in our operations business, but then we have editors and publishers in our STMJ business, very different profiles of people. And if you look at the sentiment in those parts of the organization, they're very different. So there's not a one size fits all. It's very federated in that way. So very quickly, we're able to take a piece of communication we need to land, and we're able to redesign it in 8 different ways to land in that particular area of the business based on the sentiment of that business. And so that's also been really game changing, and the pace at which we can do that. And then using multiple skills at the same time. So /skill technologist /skill editorial will then draw on the technology persona, but then all of our editorial kind of best practice. So we use something called, for example, smart brevity. We also want to use certain language because it's in line with our brand. And very quickly, we're able to produce something quite bespoke for that area of the business. So just, again, I could talk forever, but those are some of it started in sort of quite simple task-based ways, but now it's getting quite interesting where we're able to almost use AI as doing some of the work that team members would do. So it's thinking about, therefore, what does the team do? And that's really interesting conversation. We're grappling with that at the moment.
We'll come back to that in just a sec. But Eric, what about you? Where has it made the biggest difference to the way that you work?
I think for me, the biggest shift perhaps is that I get to the sort of the truth much faster. So I get to see quickly whether something actually makes sense or it doesn't. So, for example, a year ago, I was mainly using AI at the end to sort of help write or tidy things up. Now I use it much, much earlier, right from the beginning, while things are still forming, still being discussed, to shape the work itself. So, for example, instead of jumping straight into a plan, I use AI to work through the right questions, design conversations with stakeholders, and use all of that input to build something that's a bit more relevant to the business. And of course, when feedback comes in, I'm not just summarizing this feedback anymore. I'm using it to understand what really matters and what leaders need to act on. So I guess now it's less about fixing messages at the end and more about getting the thinking right at the start. And I think that's changed what matters, because a polished message on its own doesn't really prove much anymore, because everybody can do that. What not everybody can do is the thinking behind the words, and I think that's where AI can be a huge help.
Absolutely. And I'm going to get stuck straight into agents, right? Because this is kind of like, I mean, a couple of years ago, we were all over prompts, weren't we? And there was like prompt engineering, and we did a guide probably about 3 or 4 years ago now on prompts to use for experience in internal communication. That's completely redundant now. This world is moving so quickly. I feel sorry for anybody writing a book on AI, because I just think, how's it going to be? By the time you've written it, surely it's out of date, right? But anyway, that's one of the subject. But agents. So this is kind of what people are playing with, experimenting with at the moment. Some people feel quite befuddled by it. So, Eric, I know you've done some work with agents, right? Talk to us. What is an agent? How do we get started with agents? Should we use them? How do we like just demystify this whole topic area?
Okay. So, I mean, look, I'm going to I'm going to start taking some of the mystery out of the term AI agent, because I think it can sound a bit more complex than it needs to be.
Yeah.
So in practical terms, in the context of internal communications, an AI agent is just an AI set up to behave in a particular way for a particular purpose using a defined set of information. It is not a general chatbot, and it's not there to answer anything you throw at it. It's been given boundaries, so what it should consider, what it should draw from, how it should respond, and just as importantly, what it should not do. And I've built a few different ones in the past couple of years, but I'm going to talk about the two I'm the most proud of and I use every single day. So I have one that acts like a comms strategist, and I use it to help me think through before I write anything. So shaping plans, shaping narratives, looking at risks, and making sure that what I'm doing lines up with the direction of the business. And I also have a ghostwriter agent, and that's there to sort of help translate this thinking into something that sounds like the leader I'm working with, the right tone, the right level of certainty, knowing when to say less or more. And then I use these two together in a more deliberate way. So one focuses on whether something should be said at all and whether it's aligned, and the other one is on how it should sound. And keeping them separate helps avoid sort of everything blending into something that feels fine but slightly off. So, I mean, overall, they are there to hold context. They are there to maintain consistency and bring a bit more discipline into the thinking behind the work. And for me, that's where the value sits. I'm more than capable of writing stuff, but all this thinking, that's what makes a difference in the final output.
Love it. And Sarah, you mentioned then a couple of ways you're using agents already and really going after the holy grail of personalization when it comes to internal comms. Any other thoughts or tips from you in terms of how you get started with agents? Because I think people go, yeah, that makes sense. But if I'm sat right here, right now, in front of my laptop, going, okay, I'm using Claude or Chat or whatever. How do I set up an agent? What would you say to people?
Oh, Emma, I was that person. So where it all began was months ago, we were privileged enough as a senior leadership group to have a session with Anthropic, who came and did a 2 hour training session with us. And they'd set us a task as part of that 2 hour training, but a lot of people found that they just wanted to work on something that was important to them. And I find that more and more, by the way. Actually, it's much better to find a use case that people want to solve and then get support on how to build out that use case. I typed into Claude, I'm attaching my internal communications strategy. Please, can you build me a team of world-class agents to deliver my strategy? And Claude, and I didn't know what to expect, Claude actually produced me a document where there were 8 agents. So it analysed my full strategy, worked out all the different types of agents it would need to deliver on that strategy. Everything from, to your point, around editorial through to event delivery and design, through to strategy, through to measurement and delivery. And it actually wrote a job description for each agent and then created the prompt to design the agent. Now, this is where the human oversight bit comes. And why I do feel very privileged to be coming to AI with 20 years of experience under my belt, I have to say, because what I'm able to do is very quickly review that and understand where I feel it's correct or where I need to make amendments. So there was obviously an element of human oversight. It was probably around 65%, 70% right. And then once I'd got it to a place where I felt that that was a good summary of the types of roles I would need to deliver the strategy, I asked Claude to then take the document back and build the agents for me, which it did. Claude then prompted me to say, these are the types of information I need and data I need in order to build out my agent and my skill as reference. And so I started to build a repository for each skill of reference materials. So again, an example, one of my agents is around measurement and insight. I mentioned it. So that has, for example, our full internal communications measurement dashboard. It has our company OKR dashboard. It has access to, and eventually, fingers crossed, we'll have a plug-in to our Office Vibe Always On measurement tool, because that would be incredible, where I'm not having to kind of manually upload data. We're not there yet, because we're slowly bringing the plugins in sort of one by one. And then what was kind of cool, and I'm not professing that I've got this all right, by the way, so I'm definitely still learning and experimenting, but it enabled me to then recreate that agent or skill, download it, so that my team could then upload the same skill. So you can't, in Claude, tell me if I've got this wrong, Eric, you might know more than me, but I don't believe you can share a skill in Claude, or it's kind of an equivalent of an agent, but you can download it and upload it. But then what we've done is we've actually centralized the folders for each agent with all the information in, so that we're all pointing to the same folder and the same reference material for our agents. And then we update those reference materials as a team. And we're really experimenting with that at the moment. So I hope that makes sense. So I had no experience of how to build an agent, so I made Claude help me build an agent. So you don't need to know.
I think it's a great use case there, Sarah, and I think we're applying the design thinking mentality that at People Lab we are all about, which is getting comfortable with experimentation, getting
Yes.
comfortable with curiosity, asking great questions. And I think you've touched on this, Eric. So much of the power of AI, as you go through it, you're learning all the time how to get better and better outcomes by asking better and better questions. And I think so much of that comes from our humanity and our human skills of curiosity and creativity. I think that's absolutely critical to get a good outcome.
And Emma, also just to add to what you said, and challenge. So the thing that I've really enjoyed is the back and forth with Claude. Quite often I'm saying, well, this is okay, but it's not good enough. What reference materials have you used? Why have you not thought about this? And Claude can be quite apologetic sometimes, and actually, him, I don't know if it's a her or a he or whatever, but recognizes that they could have almost done a better job. And I find that sometimes a little bit off-putting, because I certainly don't take the first draft as the final draft. There's definitely a whole iteration process.
Yeah. There's something that you said earlier, Sarah, which I think is a really critical point around, with all these amazing tools, we still need our expertise, right? So we
Correct.
think about human plus AI. So you're absolutely right. I've got a bit of you tell me if it's a good analogy or not, but I use the analogy of like sat nav. And well, years ago we had paper maps, and sat nav comes along, and this is a true story. So last year we were going down to the festival we always go to in Wales every year, Green Man Festival. It's right in the middle of Wales near Crickhowell. And we're towing a caravan down there, and there's a massive big kind of queue to get over the Severn Bridge, and sat nav's going, to go over the other bridge and da. Anyway, we end up, if anyone's familiar with this part of the world, right by Tintern Abbey, which is like terrible, like tiny little narrow lanes with a massive big caravan, and my husband's just having a meltdown, and it's literally like hills and massive steep inclines and declines. And that's where you need your human side to go, hang on a minute. I get the sat nav's got a good idea for us here, but it doesn't know we've got a big, massive caravan on the back of us. So for me, I quite like an analogy. Eric, you're smiling at that. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean, I know the area very well, so I know I know exactly what you're talking about, and I
You feel
think
my
you're
pain.
absolutely right. Yes, and context is so important, and people tend to forget that. And I'm so glad that we are talking about the importance of prompting and briefing, because I think right now that the problem is that a lot of people look at prompting as a technical skill in isolation, but in reality, prompting just it acts like briefing, and briefing has always been a core internal comms skill. So
Yeah.
that's what I always tell people, that instead of focusing on too much on the technical side of AI, which is really interesting, and if you have an interest in it, go for it. But I think it's much more important to invest into the core internal comms skills, because those are the ones that AI cannot provide for you. And these are the skills that will bring the human element into collaborating with AI, because AI is not actually intelligent. It can't read your mind. It doesn't understand what's happening around us. That's you who need to bring all of this context and experience into the work. So yes, I thought your example was fantastic.
So Eric, on that, what we talk a bit about prompting here, and I think
Yeah.
spot on. It's kind of like you kind of get out what you put in, don't you, with AI? And I've
Yes.
learned that, and I look at what the sort of results I used to get early doors compared to what I get now, and
Mm.
sometimes I'll put a lot of effort into the. It won't be like a one line prompt. It'll be like literally. Sometimes it would be like a 500-word
Yeah.
piece. It'd be like really thought through and lots of different ideas and what have you. So, any thoughts on how to get the best out of that kind of what you put into it, the questions you ask, the prompting you give it to get a better outcome? What advice would you give on that?
Well, look, I mean, I get the question quite often that, why do, for example, two communicators using the same AI tool you sort of get completely different results? And I
Mm,
always say that, the main variable is the person using it.
mm,
So what I've seen is that, AI tends to sort of reflect the quality of the thinking it's given. So, two communicators can use the same tool on the same task and still come away with completely different value because they are bringing different levels of clarity and experience into the work. And I think in a lot of cases, it has nothing to do with the prompt itself, because somebody who understands the context, who's listened properly to find out what the challenge is, who knows what the real issue is and what the business is trying to achieve, will get something genuinely useful out of AI, whether they have a perfect prompt or they don't, because they know what to ask for. And more importantly, they know what to question, what to ignore, and when something doesn't feel right. And somebody else might approach the same tool with a vague brief or an assumed answer, and AI will still respond, and it will sound fluent, and it will sound confident, and it will be fantastic. But the output won't really help because it's built on shaky foundations. But if you
mm.
don't have the experience or the skills to realize all of this, you won't be able to see the differences. So that's why I mentioned earlier that, in practice, prompting behaves like briefing.
Yeah.
And, it's always been a core internal com skill. And, so when two people get different sort of value from AI, I see it as sort of AI making a difference in internal comms capability visible. So the technology is consistent, it's the thinking that isn't. And a
Mm,
good, clever prompt won't necessarily solve that for you because on its own, it's not enough.
yeah. So
Just
sorry, go on,
I
Sarah.
was just going to build on something Eric said. So I agree with everything Eric said. I don't know if I'm sure you do this, Eric, but I don't know if other people have find this useful, is to actually use multiple platforms to kind of check the work. So what
Mm,
we're finding quite useful is to, well, there's two things. One is I sometimes quite like doing very specific prompts and then leaving prompts very open and seeing from a sort of A/B testing what the different results are. I find that fascinating to do. Because sometimes actually you can bring in your own biases.
mm,
And so that's a fascinating thing to do as a test. The other thing is I quite often get ChatGPT to write the prompt for Claude, or I get Claude to check the work of ChatGPT and so on and so forth. And I find that actually really excellent.
mm,
And I'm sure people are also finding that different tools are really good at different things. So Claude for me, and this is just my opinion, but is very good at the sort of deep strategic thinking and is very good at sort of really digging into sort of reference material and coming up with sort of strategic documents. But then is not very good at design or some of the practical elements that need doing. And then ChatGPT is much better at that. And then sort of Copilot is great at surfing all of my inbox and Monday.com, my project management tool, and bringing me, to the surface what it is I need to do this. So I think it's not a one side. It's like, how do you use multiple tools for the things that they're good at, and then how do you play with prompting to see if you get different answers and mitigate bias? Yeah.
I think it's a great approach. I love it.
Love that. It's a great build. And I had a question, then it's gone completely out of my head.
Well,
Oh,
I've got there's a question, Emma, in the
yeah.
chat that says, "What advice would you give to someone just getting started?" Um, and I was hoping something like that might come up because I think if I was to kind of say, what is your golden nugget? I would
Yeah.
say the thing that has worked the best is to make all the tools that you are prepared to make available and try and drive adoption. Put it in people's hands. They can't learn if they don't have the tools. And then combine that. I think the golden nugget is this peer-to-peer learning, like hackathons. So training is quite useful, but actually it's kind of learning on the task. And if you can learn together in groups, or if people can give use cases, that is the best way to learn. So get your hands on the tools, and then find people who can like play with you in as you design specific things that you're looking for, would be my answer. I don't know, Eric, if you agree.
Yes, I mean, look, building on that, it's also important to write all of this down, because what we are lacking at the moment is case studies. We have lots of
Yes.
prompts, we have libraries, we have everything we need, but we don't have case studies. And case studies are really important because they provide the context and they provide real scenarios. And that's when you can see whether something actually works in practice, or it doesn't. And in terms of skills, I would like to build on what you've just said and say that I know that at the moment a lot of people focus on AI skills, but for me, that's not necessarily the really important part, because if you think about it, you can learn how to use AI in 30 minutes. It's not super complicated. But to be able to use it well, you have to have, again, the core internal com skills that will take it to another level. So I would say listening, or being able to understand complex problems within the business, or having good judgment to be able to decide when something sounds good but isn't right, or having editorial discipline, which is really, really important when you work with agents. And I love your example earlier when you said that you have one central folder where you keep all the documents and you update those as a team to make sure that everything is consistent. Because I think this is key. And that's why a lot of agents don't work in businesses. They think that they set up an agent and then everything will be fantastic from that moment on. But in reality, there's just so much work behind the scenes, the maintenance, the checking, the revising. It is not as simple. So focusing on all these internal com skills will take you much further than if you just focus on the technical side of AI, which is also important, but that's not what's gonna give you sort of the edge that you are looking for when you are working with something like AI.
Yeah, building on that, Sarah, at the beginning we talked about how we're trying to build a kind of a live document and a live place to go where people are contributing thoughts, ideas, live use cases of like, here's how I've used it, this worked really well, or don't do this because it didn't work at all. Because like I say, even training, by the time you've been trained, like a few weeks later, it's kind of almost out of date already, isn't it? So yeah, I just wondered, something that I've personally found is that I've worked really hard over the year, not even consciously, kind of subconsciously, but I've kind of learned as I've gone along to train the different platforms I use to work with me more effectively, if that makes sense. So, for example, to challenge me to to not assume what I say is gospel, to have much more of a two-way. What have you done anything similar, both of you, in terms of how you get the best out of the different AI platforms that you use, rather than just kind of using it, here's a prompt, right, let's go.
Eric, do you want to jump in?
I can start. So I guess I'm in a slightly different situation, because when it comes to work, I'm only allowed to use Copilot. So I would say I'm a 90% Copilot user and 10%, everything else.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was the question again? It's my
Just
mind
how
completely completely went blank.
No, it's all good. How have you sort of worked and trained the Copilot or AI
Yes.
you're using to get the best out of you, so you work together more effectively?
Yeah, so I think the key is to use it as often as you can. And in my experience, just talk to it as you would to a colleague of yours. I always try to treat AI as somebody, for example, a new colleague who's just joined the business. So I try to give as much context as possible and try to explain the situation in a way that I would do if I was talking to an actual person. And I think if you keep doing that for a period of time, the platform you are using will pick this up, and it will end up responding to your questions and asks in a way that reflects your personality. So that's why I think, we talked about prompting and briefing. It's really, really important to sort of to learn how to brief and learn how to express yourself and learn how to ask for what you want, because once you do that, AI will follow, and it will give you much more relevant answers than otherwise. Because if your prompts are always very technical or your prompts are always very formal, AI will be responding to your questions and prompts that way. And that's not really helpful in real life. So talk to it as you would to a colleague. And if you keep doing it, it will pick it up, and you will have a much sort of personal relationship with the platform of your choice.
Love it. And what about you, Sarah? What tips have you got for how you've kind of got better outputs from using AI?
So I think one of the exercises it's quite helpful to do is almost to create a set of principles for yourself. So no matter what I ask you to do, no matter what work we're doing together, these are the principles with which you should use. So for example, you might have something, I might want always use a very human tone. Always provide a citation to any materials that you're referencing or using so that I can make sure what you're providing is correct. Always reference when writing articles, always reference our smart brevity style of writing. And what that enables you to do then is you can actually apply that to Claude as a kind of an overarching set of principles. Then when you start to prompt, you don't need to think about those things every time. And that I find very helpful. So you can get more into the kind of problem you're trying to solve within the prompt, knowing that the principles will be used across all of your task requests in co-work, for example, in my case in Claude. So that I'd really I would suggest just taking a minute to think about what are your principles? What are the things that you always want applied? And that's quite a nice way of doing it.
That's a brilliant practical tip. And I know early doors, I remember, I can't remember what I was working on, but something, and I was like, hang on a minute, where have you actually got this from? Give me the reference. And it was like, oh, I can't find it now. And I was thinking, okay. And that was like a really lesson early doors around, all right then. So exactly that point, I'm like, always give me a reference citation. I use Harvard Business Review style referencing, being an ex-academic. Give me the Harvard Business Reference Review on reference on this, where have you got it from, etc. And that's super helpful just to kind of cut through some of the stuff that it might have just hallucinated slightly. So that's quite a good one.
I don't know if you find, but I've worked quite hard to try and train out some of the AI-isms. So, for example, I noticed when we started using Claude, it would say, go left because it's not great to go right. Or be happy because you don't want to be sad. So it would always give this kind of double kind of context. And then also little things within the style of the writing. So you'd get some of the long dashes, which were an absolute giveaway. And some of the style of writing. So again, if you can actually kind of screen those out through your principles. So these are things I do not want you to do, or these are things that, I want you to challenge. And that then does help put it more in your own voice or the sort of tone that you would want. So that's the other thing I would suggest.
Although sometimes you have to keep repeating yourself, because even though you tell it
Yes.
to do it, it still does it. And I've had some really sort of heated conversations with AI around this issue. I just kept telling it not to do something, and it just kept doing it. And I find it really, really irritating because
Did you ask it why? Did you ask it why it kept doing it, Eric?
Yeah, so oh, sorry, you are right to call this out. I was like, okay, well, it would be better if I didn't have to, and you just did it in the first place.
I'm conscious that we're rapidly moving towards the end of the webinar, which is a shame. I think we could talk this for hours, but we've got so many good tips already, which is great. And like I said, we're going to be formulating this kind of live document. So please, there's so much great content already from what you've talked about today, but we'll be adding to that. But let's think about the future. What are your thoughts on where we're going next with this? Just in terms of maybe internal communicators, what do they need to be thinking about today in terms of how this is going to impact the profession moving forward? So Eric, have you got any thoughts on that?
Well, look, I mean, that's a really good question. But as I said before, I think it's really, really important to focus on the core internal comms skills, because they will become more important moving on. And again, I'm going to repeat myself here, but these are just so important that I think you can't repeat them often enough. Listening. You need a much clearer sense of what people are actually asking for. Clarity, being able to define a problem properly, what you are trying to achieve, or what sits inside the work and what doesn't. Judgment, you get to something that looks like a finished piece much faster nowadays. So the real work is deciding whether it's right, whether it holds, or whether it should go anywhere yet. And then, of course, editorial discipline, especially if you are working with agents. None of these are new skills, I know, but I think that they are becoming more and more and more important now that we are working with AI. So I think that's one thing that people should be focusing on a little bit more and move away from the technical side, because that will only take you,
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely, totally agree. So, what about you? Where are we going next with this? What's the future hold? Any thoughts on that?
I've got three thoughts, and some of these are so fresh for me. Like one of them is a conversation I had today. So we had an internal communications network meeting. We had a lady there who works in our Relics business, and she has been reviewing and rethinking our AI principles. And I don't know enough about this, so I've got to admit I've got to go away and find out more. But there's some regulation now coming in, I believe, in the US around grounds under religious belief that people will not need to or won't use or refuse to use AI.
Okay.
And there are people sitting in our organization for various reasons, whether they just don't believe in it from a sort of moral standpoint or a sort of philosophical standpoint, who won't use AI.
Mhm.
And so, how do you manage that when you're an organization that's really pushing sort of, I hate to say AI first, but this sort of, thinking, using AI as a partner on a sort of basis? I'm really interested to see where that goes, because I think there is going to be this slight revolt, I think, at some stage, and I think some of that will then turn into employee activism, and then what does that mean for jobs, etc. So that's a really interesting, like totally fresh as of today thought for me. Like, what does that all look like?
So
There's,
just on that point, just to jump in there, it's
yeah,
fascinating. Psychologist in me is desperate to just get,
yeah,
but I remember reading something a while ago about when the printing press came in the UK, and this might be wrong, I might have got this wrong, but something, just bear with me on this, something like the UK kind of typesetters or the experts at the time refused to get involved. They just brought a load of people in from Europe, and they had the jobs. And I think that's it's something, it's going to be an interesting time in terms of where that goes, like you say, in terms of what,
yeah. Employment law, employment regulation,
absolutely.
exactly.
It's all brave new world, right? We don't have any answers for this yet. So sorry, carry on.
No, 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 no. But it's really
Got a
interesting.
new
It's
problem, didn't
very super live. That is super live. And I
you?
think, we're not even seeing final thinking from sort of a legal perspective coming through yet. So it'll be really interesting to see that. The second is like, what skills are people going to need in the future? And, it's definitely going to be about our ability to understand digital workspaces. It's going to be about understanding how different tools kind of work and interwork with one another. Those of us who weren't necessarily natural technologists are going to have to learn to integrate technology into the way that we work. And I think some of the other areas are definitely, data insight and being comfortable with playing with data. Um, it's going to be about stakeholder management,
Mm,
because AI can't manage for us. So a lot of the work we were doing is now, how do we navigate, and we're going to be asked to do more, and that's, that, and stakeholder management at Elsevier is a big part of what we do. And then it's also about, how do we escalate? So how do we identify where something is right, something is wrong, morally correct, data wise, that it's a judgment, human judgment, and the confidence in your own personal human judgment, I think, is going to be really interesting. And
mm,
then the final thing I would say is, I'm really interested to see what happens to culture in organizations, because everything's going so fast. We're going from innovation timelines of maybe 4 to 6 months to 8 weeks. It's affecting the way we think about financing. It's affecting the way we're actually organizing our business, but it's also creating a lot of stress in people's minds. And I think there's something about, like, AI is bringing this sort of wave of energy right now, but it's also creating quite a lot of concern or maybe anxiety. And how do we make sure that we have resilient cultures or a resilient culture that can thrive whilst we navigate this journey? And I think that's going to be really interesting. And we're starting to see that a little bit now creep in.
yeah, no, really, really good points. Love it. And the skills piece, agree with all of that. And I think the kind of where I'm coming from on that, and the research that I've done, is that I think our human skills will be ever more important. So our empathy, our curiosity, our creativity, as well as the digital side. I think those skills will be more important than they've ever been, is my own view on that as well. So
Yeah.
be interesting to see where it goes. Got a few questions coming through. Katie, anything that you want to pull out in terms of questions from anybody? I put you on the spot there. We've got a few minutes before we have to close off the call, but I think just wanted to just try and pick up a couple of questions if we can. Got some good comments coming through as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, loads of comments in there. There is a question, how is AI impacting how new colleagues starting out in internal comms can get up and running and learn the skills through hands-on experience?
I mean, I don't know the answer to this question. And and it's a worry for me. And I'll give you a first-hand example. I've got an 18-year-old daughter and a 16-year-old daughter in school, and neither of them are allowed to use AI in school. In fact, Claude was banned from my daughter's school. So they're coming out of school into university through education, and then suddenly they're expected to know how to integrate AI tools. And so there's something not quite connecting there, which really worries me. And for what it means for internal comms, originally I sort of felt maybe I don't know. I think you've got to have a certain level of experience to understand what's being produced is of the right standard, is of the right quality. And I think if you don't have all those years of experience, it's slightly harder to make a call or a judgment call on it. So it's how do we create the environment or the kind of guardrails for people starting out to help and support them to make those kind of judgment calls. And I don't have the answer to that at the moment, but it's an interesting question.
Good one to ponder. Eric, any thoughts from you on that one?
Yes, I mean, look, I think at the moment, we talked about this before. The conversation is still very much focusing on content creation rather than figuring out this new way of working, because working with AI is a new way of working. But what a lot of people don't realize is that it means that you can't just keep doing what you're doing now with AI, because it just doesn't work. So we need to figure out what this means in the future and how we can collaborate with AI in a way that sort of works for everybody, regardless of seniority. And I think that starts with sort of moving away from content creation, because that's not where the value of internal comms sits. It's never been there. It's always been the most sort of visible side of internal comms, but in reality, that's not where our value is. So I think it's really important to start focusing on how we can make it work. What does this new way of working mean beyond content creation? And once we get there, I think hopefully things will get a little bit easier. But at the same time, the sooner you start working and playing around with AI, the better, because you don't want to get to a point where everybody's using it already and you are playing catch up in a live environment where you are also expected to deliver results. So whether you like AI or not, it doesn't matter. You can't just stick your head into the sand. You need to keep an eye out. You need to learn. You need to talk to people, because you will be expected to have the answers. And the sooner you start, the better.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Some great points coming out there. And I think it's such a critical time, not just for our discipline, our profession, I think for all professions, because I think there's particularly, I mean, you mentioned data insight before, Sarah, and I started a career as a research psychologist, so I take that really seriously. But I've seen a lot of people in organizations tasked with analyzing the survey that for no fault of their own, haven't got any research background, and have been tasked with, for example, analysing loads of qualitative data, and that's because that isn't really taken seriously, not given the respect as a discipline, and the expertise is not given the respect that it should have. And I do worry with internal comms that, you could have some sort of senior people thinking, well, why do I need an internal comms team? I can just get AI to write all my content, write my scripts, come up with a comms plan, because they don't respect and understand the nature of what great comms looks like. And I think it's a really critical time for us to really demonstrate what stream we're in, whether it's comms, research, employee experience, HR, to say, no, you still need us because we really know what we're doing. And for me, that's the critical part really in terms of where we go next with this. Otherwise, I think we will see. And I've already heard this. I've heard this directly from people that I know and work with, that teams are being made redundant because the powers that be think that AI could do it, and that just shows it's very short-sighted, and they will fall down over that. But I think we've got a really key role at the moment to sort of make the case around why we're still needed. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. Well, listen, thank you both so much for your
Thanks, Emma.
really
Thank you.
appreciate it. And like I say, we'll be following up with a recording of the webinar and this kind of like knowledge playbook piece with lots of kind of live document. We're going to take some great stuff from today and get people to contribute to that. So please get involved with that because it will be a really good resource. And we're just doing it because we think it's a really useful thing to do. And it's not, we're not going to, it's going to be free. We're not going to make any money off it. It's free for everybody. And we just want to do it because we want somewhere to go that's really helpful to kind of, just learn from other people. So thank you so much for your time. Katie, have I forgotten anything that I need to say before we dial off?
No, I think we're all good. But yes, do look out for the email with the recording. I'm going to put the questions in there as well for our knowledge exchange. And obviously we'd love to hear from everybody wherever you are in your journey using AI, because as Emma said right at the very beginning, we're all learning together here. So yeah, and every bit of advice, tip, things that you've discovered along the way, it's all going to be useful to someone somewhere.
Brilliant. So thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, whatever you're doing. Massive thank you again to Eric and Sarah. Really appreciate your time. Some brilliant thoughts and observations and practical tips. So thank you so much. And bye from me and Katie.
See you. Bye.
Thanks, all. Thank you.